They all went down the hall here to the majority leader's office, all my Republican friends. They walked into that office. They had their Wall Street lobbyists with them. They had their drug company lobbyists. They had their tobacco company lobbyists. And that's where they wrote the bill.
They must like the fact that we have the highest business tax rate in the world, which forces jobs and investments overseas.
This deficit-busting tax cut will endanger Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid.
This country's in deep debt. You don't help the poor by not solving the problems of debt, too. One side believes the federal government is the last answer to everything. My gosh, you have to be a real raving idiot to believe that.
Just some of the sound on tax reform today, but the big event, the big deal, was Senator John McCain. He came out, his statement came out from his office saying that I believe this legislation, though far from perfect, would enhance American competitiveness, boost the economy, provide long overdue tax relief for the middle class families. Went on to say he'd vote for it. Well, that sent the stock market just soaring today, past 24,000. You can see the milestones here, the 1,000 point jumps since January, March, August, October. Late this afternoon, the Joint Committee on Taxation put out its score on the Senate bill. And it said it would reduce the deficit by $407.5 billion over 10 years, but the bill would still cost about $1 trillion. The report estimates that the proposed plan would lead to a 0.8% rise in GDP relative to current framework. Well, Democrats jumped all over that.
Steve Mnuchin said this bill would generate so much growth, it would take care of the $1.5 trillion and generate $1 trillion on top of it. The facts are now in. The Republican plan loses $1 trillion. The growth fantasy is over.
I can't believe that we wouldn't have more confidence in the American economy that we could generate higher than 1.9% economic growth. That is the straitjacket that constrains their models.
Which is why there's all this talk about a possible trigger, that if the administration goals of growth aren't realized, that some cut or increase in taxes would happen. Let's bring in our panel. Jonah Goldberg, senior editor at National Review, Leslie Marshall, syndicated talk radio host, and Charles Hurt, opinion editor for the Washington Times. Quite something to see this today. It seems like the impetus is there to get it across the finish line, Jonah.
It does. All the incentives are pointing in the right direction for the Republicans to do this. It would be, I think they all believe, whether it would be or wouldn't be, they all believe it would be disastrous for them if they didn't get something passed out. I think they're probably right about that. And, I am now so jaundiced, I literally cannot listen to anybody be outraged about deficits at this point, because I remember under Bush, the Democrats screamed about deficits. Under Obama, the Republicans screamed about deficits. These same people were perfectly fine with Obama racking up $5 trillion in deficits, but they're horrified about $1 trillion in deficits. I think deficits matter, but all of it, there's so much rank opportunism and demagoguery in all of this.
We're not done yet. I mean, the process is the Senate will likely vote tomorrow. Then it goes to a conference committee, Leslie, and we're talking probably next week, where they have to iron out the differences and they figure out what they're going to pass.
Yeah, and I have to agree with you on the deficit part, just to say that. For Democrats, as a Democrat here, it's not about the deficit. It's about who does it affect. And that's one of the reasons I was shocked with Senator McCain, because if you look at his state, and not just the polls that they don't favor it, what this is going to do to Medicaid and Medicare. And I have to say, personally, not being able to have the out-of-pocket medical deduction, that's going to hurt, me and my family and many families that I know about. But when you look at what are they ironing out, who's up for re-election, what do their constituents want in their state? And even though it looks like with Senator McCain they're going to go over the finish line, I'm not so sure, because you still have that fragmentation in the Republican Party, and it's not just about deficit, but it certainly is about some of these cuts where Democrats have a concern.
Well, speaking of Democrats, here is Senator Pat Roberts from Kansas talking about he hopes they might join in.
It reminds me a little bit of a country western song that obviously my staff would hope that I would not mention, but it was "The bridge is washed out and I can't swim and my baby's on the other side." Well, the bridge is not washed out, and the tax bill is on the other side, along with an American Renaissance. Hopefully some of my colleagues across the aisle will join us.
We just like playing some of the sound from the Senate floor. I mean, we just do. Some of it is really quite something. But what about that? You know, there are a number of Democrats up for re-election in 2018 from states that Donald Trump won, in which they voted not to even debate tax reform.
Well, I think Democrats are in they've got a pretty firm grip on their members on this right now, and it's hard to see if they haven't lost any up to now. It's hard to see how they lose them now. And I do think, obviously, there are a lot of big differences that need to be ironed out. But the fact remains, you know, all the same pressures that have gotten them to the place we're at now are still in effect, and they're doomed. And not only Donald Trump, but the Trump agenda, and I think individual Republicans are going to have a much harder road to hoe if they don't have something to show for it. The thing about John McCain, I was interested, despite with the exception of how he began, which is by saying that though it's far from perfect, I was surprised at how bullish his statement was. It was far more enthusiastic, talking about American prosperity and how what good this could do for the economy. And so I think that I sense from that he's kind of on it for the long haul.
We're a long way from.
Yeah, I was going to say, you know, in terms of country western songs, you could, instead of Pat Roberts, you could have really imagined him saying, "Take this job and shove it," right? I mean,
that's usually the song he sings.
Yeah, that's his favorite tune.
We're going to talk about
when he voted against it twice. I mean, the Bush tax cuts. It's the same argument, and now he's, like you said, he's gun ho.
Yeah, we were going to talk about the shakeup, but you know what? It's such speculation about Tillerson, and it's probably going to develop over coming days. We're going to move on. Next up, chain migration, and we are awaiting a verdict in the illegal immigrant murder trial in San Francisco. When that happens, you'll see it here live.
Chain migration is a disaster for this country, and it's going to end.
Will it be part of a DREAMer deal,
yes,
a DACA deal?
It'll be part of a DACA deal. DACA's a lot different than DREAMer.
I mean, for the deferred action for childhood arrivals, will you require that if any amnesty talks will require chain migration to
I don't
end?
think any Republican would vote for anything having to do with leaving chain migration.
We still are going to welcome spouses and unmarried minor children. But at some point, when you have a country, you have to have borders, and you have to make decisions about what kind of immigrants your country needs.
Senator Cotton, earlier on this show, he is a part of a co-sponsor on a piece of legislation called the RAISE Act with Senator Perdue from Georgia. And it's about these numbers that we received tonight exclusively. Just some of the countries here. This is a breakdown from 2005 to 2016. 9.3 million new immigrants admitted based on family alone. Mexico, you see there, 1.73 million new migrants based on family. Philippines, 643,000. India, 614,000. Pakistan, 177,000. It's the first time there's been a breakdown by country. There's been a breakdown of any numbers because DHS just didn't do that before. We're back with the panel. Charlie, it seems significant to see these numbers and the scope of them.
Yeah. No, and we knew that they were large numbers, and they are large numbers. Look, you know, we're the only major country in the world where we allow immigrants to pick us rather than us picking them. And basically what that means is that we wind up being a solution to other people's problems, as other countries' problems, as opposed to more carefully picking who it is that we want. And the people that get hurt the most in this situation are poor people, working poor, and minorities, and all the people that Democrats claim, at least on Election Day, to represent.
Leslie, senior administration officials saying there's serious concerns solely on the basis of family ties, really not background checks. They don't know, how many terrorist criminals, bad people are in this mix because the stats just aren't there. But they said there's profound public safety concerns when they look at all these numbers.
Well, first of all, I think we do know, at least present day, when we look back on what terrorist attacks have we had, who are the perpetrators, and also massacres in this country, regardless of the weapon used. We've had one. We have had one person as a result of this chain migration. Having said this, Senator Schumer, he himself, and I agree with him on this, it's time. I mean, the reason it was put in place originally, we don't have that need anymore. We are a very diverse nation, and I think it's fine to say goodbye to chain migration. I do agree with you that we need to be careful as to who we let in. Obviously, we have to have proper vetting. But I would go further than Senator Cotton has proposed in his legislation. In addition to children and spouses, I would say that parents and grandparents should be allowed. And then again, we do choose, outside of the chain migration scenario, we do choose immigrants when you look at the IT world, especially in Silicon Valley, and when you look at medicine. We have so many patients that come in the ER. We don't have as many ER physicians. We don't have the internal medicine and general physicians. We just don't have, we have everybody specializing and subspecializing in medicine, and that's why we're bringing so many people from overseas. But chain migration, I'm in favor of that going away. Many Democrats are.
Yeah, so whenever I'm asked what my preferred immigration policy is, I always say, to have one. You know, and if we want a million people a year, great. Then it's a million, it's not more. We get to decide who they are. We're a country. We get to decide who our citizens are. I have no problem getting rid of chain migration for all the reasons that have already been laid out. I also disagree a little bit with President Trump when he says it's been a disaster for our country. A lot of these people are very good and decent people, and to blanketly say that anybody who came here through chain migration would denounce a lot of very decent people, including some relatives of mine. Nonetheless, we have, as a country, we have every obligation to have a serious immigration policy. We're the only country in the world that still does it this way on any large scale. And I think some of the stuff about terrorism and all that is a bit of a red herring, but it doesn't matter. We get to decide who gets to be a citizen, where they come from, and why we bring them in here.
Just so you know, this RAISE Act replaces the current permanent employee visa system with a skills-based point system, prioritizes immediate family households while eliminating preferences of extended adult family members, eliminates diversity visa lottery, and limits refugees offered permanent residency at $50,000 a year. That's how the legislation stacks up. But this is going to be a part of a DACA deal.
Yeah, and I think that interview with Laura Ingraham last night from Mitch McConnell made that very clear, and that was very significant.
At the minimum, it has to be part of at least not having chain migration for the DACA kids themselves. Otherwise, you're amnestying all those kids plus maybe 2 or 3 million other relatives of theirs.
Panel, thank you. When we come back, how do we know it's the holiday season, the Christmas season in the nation's capital? Well, we'll show you.